What is up, guys? So I keep getting questions about should I go with the G7 or should I go with the G8, and I just want to talk about the pricing and sort of the differences here. So the pricing is really interesting because you can get the G8 for around 200 bucks locked on AT&T, and then you can get it unlocked for 260. And the G7 you can get right now for 146, and it's pretty interesting. So as you can see, not a huge price gap from the the 200 to the 146. Before that unlocked version, there's going to be a 260, so it is going to be a little bit more. So if you're on a strict budget, trying to find out which one you actually want, so the first big difference with the G8 and the G7 would probably be the display. So on the G8 you have an OLED 1440p display, but on the G7 you actually have a IPS display, and it is also 1440p as well, and they're both around the same screen sizes. You have a 6.1 inch display on both of these phones. So me personally, I prefer the OLED displays definitely for the always on function. Now believe it or not, the G7 has an always on display as well, but it does drain battery life. I've noticed significantly if you leave it off. I left it off and then I turned it on, and you do notice a decrease in battery life. You do not have that on the G8, and plus you get to take advantage of the always on display with the customizations LG has put on it. So also the blacks are deeper on the OLED display, and I just think it's overall just better display technology at this point. Some people don't like IPS displays or OLED displays because you get the screen burn in. So that is something that I guess, but I don't really see a lot of LG phones with that problem. I've seen a lot of Samsung phones with the screen burn-in problem, but not really on LG phones, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. The next really big difference is actually battery life. So on the G7 you have a 3000 milliamp battery, and on the G8 you have a 3500 milliamp battery, and it is actually a big difference. You get much better battery life on the G8. Hopefully I can do a battery drain test on the G8, G7, and V40 to show you the difference. It has the best battery life out of both of those two. So if you're looking for a phone that's with excellent battery life, you might want to spend that extra money and get the G8 because it is definitely worth it. But again, you can get through a day of battery life on the G7. It's just if you want just the maximum amount, then the G8 is going to be the way to go. Another difference is the Snapdragon 845 versus the Snapdragon 855. So as we saw in the speed test, there's not a huge difference between those two processors, and they both can pretty much do the same thing. They all play the same games, Fortnite, PUBG, whatever, plays it on high. So you're not going to see a huge difference with performance on both these phones. But the 855 is slightly faster. So if you're just in the specs and you care about that 0.5 seconds of the phone being faster, then that is another reason to go with the G8. But overall, it's not a huge deal for me. So another cool thing that I noticed was that the G7 actually just has overall better speaker. So they both only have one single firing speaker, but the G7 is clearly the better speaker. It's louder, and it just overall just sounds better in my opinion. So that is one thing. Now if you are into listening to music out loud or just watching videos out loud and you just want the overall best quality, then the G7 is definitely the way to go. Now with the G7 you get 64 gigs and 4 gigs of RAM on the base model, and on the G8 you get 128 gigs and 6 gigs of RAM. So again, multitasking is going to be better on the G8 as well, and the G8 does have Android 10 out of the box. Mine's did, and you have Android 9 on the G7, but the G7 will get Android 10 in Q3 of this year, LG has said, as well as the V40 if you didn't catch that video. So you will have that, you just don't have it right now. Now the last big difference is the camera. So you do have a 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide on the G7, shoots in 4K 30 or 60 FPS. You have a front facing camera that is 8 megapixels, and on the G8 you have the same dual camera setup here. So you have a 16 megapixel ultra wide in a 12 megapixel standard, shoots in 4K 30 or 60 FPS. Front facing cameras in 8 megapixels, shoots in 1080p. So the cameras are much better on the G8 by a mile. Color science is much better, dynamic range, everything is just much better on the G8, even the video. So that is definitely one thing to consider. If you want the best camera, go with the the G8. So overall, as we can see, the G8 is definitely a worthy upgrade. I feel like the price gap is not super huge, so I feel like, if you're not on a strict budget, then go with the G8. Alright, so basically, if it were me, I would just spend the extra money and get the G8. It is a pretty worthy successor of the G7. Now, if you are on a really strict budget and you're like, I don't care about the OLED display, I don't really care about having the A55 processor, the cameras and stuff like that, battery life, which is a lot of stuff. But if you just like, I don't really care, I'm on a strict budget, I don't want to spend that much, the G7 is enough. Then it is enough. I really love the G7 actually out of all three of these phones because of the speaker one, and also I just really like the feel of the G7. It's definitely not the same feel as the G8. It just feels better in the hand to me as well. But as we can see, the G8 is the better phone, so it really just comes down to that. You gotta look at these specs and sort of make your decision based off what you really care about. So thanks for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one.